Hello, everybody. I'm so excited to see you, Miss Terry. It's been a while.
I have missed you, and I'm glad that we're here. This is the first episode in 2022 of Queer Chat with
Brian,
and Terry. Yes.
yay.
Hey, a lot's been happening, and
Hmm.
I've missed you. And some of
Yes,
our, both of our followers,
right,
have said, "Where have you been?"
right.
So, but you've been somewhere special, and I wanted to go, but it didn't work out. You went to New Mexico for a conference.
Well, the conference is supposed to be in New Mexico, as you know, but then a little bit ago, they decided they would make it virtual. So it was a
Because of
very,
COVID.
yeah, because of the Omicron variant. So it was a very different experience in some ways. But one of the things I found really interesting this year was that there were a lot of people who were creating like affinity groups, community groups, where you could just go in and you could say, hey, I'm interested in this topic. And then people would kind of join and message. And then they had like a Zoom meetup for those things. And that's where I really met a lot of people and discussed a lot of different topics. And it's just really interesting to me how far the organization has progressed in the movement, the LGBTQ Christian movements progressed since I first, sort of got involved eons ago.
Well, let me ask you, one of our goals for this year is to keep our videos briefer.
Right.
So we kind of need to hone in quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So this progression, in a few words, how can you describe the progression that
Yeah,
you've
so I'd,
seen?
I'd say when I came out, like in the early 90s, you sort of had maybe two thoughts on what might be an acceptable Christian ethic for a queer person. The goal really was to become side X. Side X would be X gay. So you would have conversion therapy, you change, and that was the side X. And then worst case scenario, if God didn't bless you with change, you'd be side B. And side B said, okay, well, I'm going to accept that I'm not going to change, but I have to be celibate.
That
And then
sounds
sort of
terrible
from
either way.
that, yeah, and then sort of from that, you developed an idea of, I sort of, when I came out, I said, well, I'm not going to be able to be celibate, but there's side A. So side A would be, okay, it's fine for you to be with someone, but you need to model that relationship pretty much identically to sort of what the heterosexual norm would be. So you're going to not have sex until you get married, and then you can't married, and then you're going to be with that person for the rest of your life. So then we had sort of side A and side B.
Okay, so we have trying to fix it and get rid of being LGBTQ.
Mm-hmm.
We have, okay, we can't fix it, but we're not going to indulge it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have, okay, it's a natural human thing. We can't stop it. So we're going to do it the way all the married heterosexual couples do.
Right. And so there was all sorts of notion of that, like purity culture and sort of saving yourself. And I think what we've seen over the last, 20, 30 years, since that's been sort of predominant Christian notion about a sexual ethic, is we've just seen that that's a really disastrous way to go about it. I mean, the girls who were in the purity culture have had far more teen pregnancies than the ones who were not. So it really, the statistics have borne out. And then we see a lot of people just, who's just the mental trauma and the stress of that have really gotten to them. So, and especially at this last conference, what we've seen are people willing to start looking at more expansive ideas around what might be an acceptable Christian ethic. And so one of the meetup groups that I joined was people were talking about polyamory, which
Now,
is,
can you real quickly? Yes, you're about to, but I have to ask a question every once in a while, so it seems like I'm doing an interview. Because I'm a professional interviewer.
you are.
So you mentioned polyamory, and does that mean just licentious sleeping around and whoring after anybody?
Right. I think it's interesting because the way that we've sort of talked about sexual ethics typically is you either have monogamous sex within your marriage, and then everything outside of that, it just sort of opens you up to being just slutty and whoring. And, and I'm not slut-shaming anybody. I'm very sex positive. But what the organization has started to look towards is to contemplate different notions about what might be an acceptable sexual ethic. I sat in on a meetup group, and the guy who was leading it was very familiar with the work of Margaret Farley. And she is a Catholic nun who actually has a lot of insight about what is a healthy Christian sexual ethic. And she sort of, does away with this whole notion that somehow sex is bad, but inside this confines of this, it's great. And says, well, what are some ethics like consent, equity, mutuality, do no unjust harm? So it was very interesting to kind of have a discussion. And I think one of the things that the queer community is doing is we're sort of leading the charge on these discussions, and then sort of helping the straight community, the heteronormative community, kind of take a look at then their sexual practices, because this, the whole notion of how things were working before just really weren't working for anybody. And it was just leading to a lot of really damaging theology that, is quite honestly, it's not biblical. And so that's one of the things that we're looking at is, not chucking the Bible, but really sort of grounding our sexual ethic in the teachings of Jesus.
There's two amazing things that if people really look, that they see when they look in the Bible about sex. The first thing that's amazing is what it doesn't say, but they thought it does. And the second thing that is amazing is what it does say, but they didn't know it does. And so it's like when I was a child, we had a game, and my brothers and I played the game, but we lost the instructions and the rules. Over time, our own rules morphed. Then one time we found in the game closet, we found the rules, and it was a completely different game. And it's kind of, it feels like that we've been trying to live our lives with purity culture. We thought we were following the rules in the Bible, but we made up our own rules over time. And then we go back and look and we say, wow, that's completely different.
Right.
And just for the fun of it, the name of the game was Risk.
Risk,
it's a
yes.
perfect thing for us to be talking about when we're talking about sexual ethics.
Right.
Because a lot of times the point of sexual ethics is to avoid doing wrong, avoid risk, avoid unwanted pregnancies, avoid STDs, avoid the social damage, the psychological damage. And the only way to avoid it is a heteronormative, monogamous marriage. And so what I'm hearing from you is that rather than modeling ourselves in the LGBTQ community after that, we are breaking new ground.
Right. Yeah. And sort of just pushing in. Quite honestly, I think what we're doing is we're just talking about things that are already happening across all spectrums of society. And I think that's the thing that, it's not like somehow we are inventing these types of relationships and things. These things are always happening. It's just that they're not talked about. And we're sort of forcing people to have better discussions about sexual ethics. And it's really fascinating to hear some of the stories of folks who are, because you have a broad spectrum of people at this meeting. You have some people who are in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 70s, and so you have a lot of different people who have lived through very different notions about what is a sexual ethic. And that's what's really fascinating. You can see the elements of what has worked and what's been very damaging, and then kind of take that tradition, pull in the scripture, use reason, bring in all this different experience, and using that sort of Wesleyan quadrilateral notion, come up with a sexual ethic that hopefully, will work for you. And I think one of the other takeaways from that is there's not a one size fits all sexual ethic. That was the other big takeaway I had that seemed very much, and that was something that I think was kind of surprising, because normally we think, well, no, here's what's right and everything else is wrong. And that's just, like your sexual ethic may be different from mine, may be different from someone else's. And, that's okay.
I'm hearing all the way through this, an emphasis in letting people be adults, letting us use our own hearts, our own minds, our own souls, our own understanding of scripture, our own relationship with God, to develop our own sexual ethic, as
Mhm.
opposed to some external thing being imposed on us.
Mhm. Right.
Wow. Um, Perhaps the most important thing in it all is these 70-year-olds. Did you get the names and numbers of the 70-year-old men?
Well, I guess, Terry, you're just going to have to go next year and meet them all yourself.
Okay. Well, I was planning to go when it was in person,
Yeah.
but you
Right.
know,
Yep.
anyway. So as people were sharing these things, and let me ask you, it's a question directed at you, but it's only as personal as you choose to make it in your response.
Hmm.
Okay. So as you were interacting with these people of all these different varieties, and when we interact with people, we change.
Hmm.
If we don't change, then the interaction didn't occur.
Hmm.
So, uh, what is different in Brian today from Brian a month ago because of this conference?
Yeah, that's a great question. One
Oh,
of the interesting aspects of this was really the frank discussions that people had about things that happen in the bedroom. A lot of times our discussions around sexual ethics are centered on, okay, well, this is the point at time, I'm going to have all these rules about sort of then getting someone into my bedroom for sex. And then we sort of close the door and we don't talk about it. So at this particular conference, I had raised the question on that and said, hey, what is our sexual ethics sort of like once the door shut and we're in that bedroom? What do we negotiate, what we do, what types of practices? And that was really an interesting discussion because that's a discussion we don't really have that much.
right,
And so
right.
it was very helpful to have some people with some different experience. And a guy, who was very involved in the kink fetish community sent me a spreadsheet with like 900 different potential sexual practices
Really?
to negotiate and discuss with your partner. So
Wow,
that was something
you've got a life mission.
Brian's different today than he was in terms of, just kind of thinking about different, kind of activities. And it was just really enlightening because I think a lot of that then, we always attach a lot of shame with sex just because that's what we've been sort of. And so I think just sort of having that discussion and realizing that, yeah, there's a lot of interesting ways that people explore each other's physical bodies. And as long as you sort of do that in a healthy, productive way, then that brings you two closer together, then that can be very positive. So I think that's how I've changed. So why don't you wrap us
Okay,
up
well,
here,
yeah, I have
Terry?
one more question for you. But as you say that about the physical, I want to just throw in that the experiencing someone else physically
Mhm.
is a gateway into experiencing them. I don't know how you want to say it, their soul.
Yeah.
But let me ask you then this last question. Um, is there a way to take that which you experienced with that degree of openness, even going all the way as far as kinky stuff, is there a way to take that and apply it in the average church group? Like,
You
I
know,
mean, for example, our group. Can we
yeah,
get
I
together in
I
a
I I
room and
think
talk
that
about it?
that's one thing that we had talked about was to have a discussion or to have sort of a chat on sexual ethics. And I do think that it is possible. I think there will be different people who may or may not be comfortable leading that sort of thing, participating in that sort of thing. But I think because we are coming at it from a sort of a Christian ethic, then I think it's that sort of the grounding of what we're talking about is, then because I think the Christian ethics then, of really apply in other aspects. And we're sort of having a discussion that sort of is seen as taboo, but it's only because we've made it that way. There's no reason specifically for it to be that way. So yeah, great questions.
Okay.
Thanks. Thanks. Good
Yeah.
discussion.
So let's wrap up with promo. we have just, we have the weekly Bible study that's available
Yes.
on Zoom,
Right.
and we've just finished a series, and we're about to go into another subject for about the next month. So tell me, what did we just finish, and what are we about to do?
Yeah, so I just finished a very lengthy Bible study, probably over 4 months, 5 months on the clobber verses. And we just went and did a very deep dive into all those verses and finished that up last week with a look at Israeli purity culture and sexuality as property. And then we are going to start a new discussion on gender. So we say, what does the Bible say about gender? And so it's going to, we're going to look at transgender issues, but then also just broadly, has Christ moved us beyond male and female? Can we imagine a Christian church beyond gender? So it's a very exciting study I'm looking forward to.
And so it's going to address all types of things on gender, so it'll actually apply to everybody.
Yes, absolutely.
Not just people in the LGBTQ community.
Right. Right.
Okay, excellent. Well, so if somebody wants to be involved in our Bible study or any of our other great programs, what do they do?
The best way to reach us is probably just ask to join our private Facebook group. So it's First Baptist Greenville LGBTQ and Friends Community Group. And if you search that on Facebook, you can find us. Or if you're not on Facebook, you can go to you can email us at lgbtqqcommunity@firstbaptistgreenville.com.
Great.
Thanks.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing your experiences. It sounds great, and it's exciting. I'm looking forward to this study.
Yeah, I'm excited you're going to join.
I'm happy we're back together again.
Yes. Yes, love. Together reunited, and it feels so good.
Yeah.
Bye, my love.
Yeah. All right. Well, and just to reiterate, all men between 65 and 75 with pretty eyes and a cute smile are more than welcome.
Bye, Terry.